Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, good to see you.
Thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. For the beginning, let's take a look back. Can you share with us what happened 5 years ago when Airlines for Europe was born? What was the actual reason behind creating this association?
So when A3 was set up in 2016, the idea was really to establish a new lobby group, an association representing the interests of the European commercial airlines, bringing all of the commercial airlines, whether it be legacy airlines or low-cost airlines, together in one strong lobby organization. So that's what we did. And we quickly grew from the five founding members, five founding commercial airlines, which represented already half of the market back then. We grew from 5 to 15 and then to 16 in basically 1 year time. So the setup of A3 was a major success. The major legacy airlines and low-cost airlines joined our ranks. And this is why today we are a very good reflection of the market. We cover low-cost, legacy airlines, leisure airlines, but also cargo. And it's very important. So a good mix, a very good representation of the market. And therefore, we are very much appreciated by governments and EU institutions as the voice of European commercial airlines.
Absolutely. You now have over 30 members, is that correct?
We have 16 airline members. Some of them are groups. Those 16 airline members represent about 35 individual airline brands. And we have on top of that 5 manufacturing members and a number of associate members. So that's a big community, which is again very representative of the aviation activities in Brussels.
Exactly. So your airline members cover around 70% of the aviation traffic in Europe.
That's correct. It's actually slightly more than 70% of passenger traffic in Europe.
It is very interesting mix of airlines, from ultra low cost carriers like Ryanair, for example, or EasyJet, or on that end of the spectrum, to the most typical legacy carriers you can think of, like Air France, KLM, or Lufthansa. So how do you handle the balance between different perspectives and expectations of these members?
Well, what brought these airlines together under the A3 banner is really that we have actually more things or challenges in common than differences. So that's the first problem, how we restart aviation again in Europe. That's the top priority. But also other structural issues, crisis or not, will not go away, such as certain monopoly positions of suppliers into the system, into value chain, such as certain airports with monopoly positions, but also air navigation service providers who also hold natural monopoly positions. And they really have a serious impact on the cost and on the price setting eventually of the price of a ticket, and therefore for the cost of travel for the passenger. Single European sky is another common theme we really strive for in order to get a more seamless European airspace through which it is easier to travel, less time consuming, but also less fuel burn and a better economic, not only economic, but also environmental impact. Passenger rights for air travel is very important, as has shown the last couple of years. So we want to make more progress on that. Sustainability is, of course, one of the top 2 issues that our members are working on with us in order to reduce CO2 emissions, and we have some interesting projects there. Airport charges is another one which will come back, crisis or not, again, once operations will start. But this is just in a nutshell some of the major, I would say, structural issues we have been working on since our establishment, and we will continue to work on because they're very structural. Again, the most important now is to be able to restart air travel for the passengers, and increasing also for cargo. That's the most important thing, because without travel, obviously, there is no aviation.
Absolutely. And we will talk about that, about future, about sustainability. But let me stop for a second on the topic of a singular European sky. It's been talked about for years or decades, to be more precise. So Uh, how optimistic are you on this topic? When do you think we can reach the agreement on the European level on this?
Well, the Single European Sky, the so-called CES2 Plus legislative proposal, is now on the table with the Parliament and the Council. So we have worked very closely with the European Commission to make sure that the proposal for a new Single European Sky, CES2 Plus, is on the table here in Brussels as quickly as possible. And so since last September, finally, the Commission published this proposal, which overall looks very good for us. There are a few points for clarification, such as that we really want to give you one example, a very strong European economic regulation of the NSPs in case that is really necessary. But of course, Parliament and Council need to agree on the text, and I think the discussions as we speak are going on right now. It's in our interest not only to move that dossier forward as quickly as possible, but it also needs to contain or maintain and retain the main elements that we would like to see. At the end of the day, for airlines and also for passengers, what does a Single European Sky mean? Its main benefits will be, first of all, a more cost-efficient use of the airspace. It will allow the airlines to choose routes that are shorter, that are more economical, that are less time-consuming, and therefore also when they're shorter, you have less fuel burn and you will have less CO2 emissions. And that's good for the airline's cost, not also for the cost for the price of the ticket, the cost of the ticket, but also for the time the time that is necessary to travel for the passenger. So it's all about optimization of the network, of the airspace network, and making it more cost efficient, because at the end of the day, the European airlines business is a very, very competitive business. Do everything really, try to cut costs where we can, which is again eventually to the benefit of the passenger, who hopefully will continue to be able to fly at affordable prices. But in terms of emissions, there we are talking about a gain between 6 and 10%, depending which statistics you consult. A Single European Sky is something that technologically can be done today, and is really what we would call a low-hanging fruit in the many things we need to do to reduce CO2 emissions. So it is there, it is possible. It is a question of political will now to get the legislative proposal, to get the legislation for the Single European Sky in place for the next decades to come. So what we are working on today will need to be future-proof. That's very important in order to allow for a growth in the sector, but also at a more environmental, I would say, a more sustainable and responsible way to grow.
Absolutely, fingers crossed. So this agenda can move quite quickly, as you are saying. It can be put into action very, very fast. So hopefully there will be enough political will for this project. Together with other European industry associations, you are pushing forward very rapidly the aviation sustainability agenda, right, now with the Destination 2050 initiative, which with the ultimate goal to reach net zero CO2 emissions in 2050. So can you briefly summarize the background of this initiative?
Well, as you know, reducing fuel burn, but also doing more and better things for the environment has always been one of the top goals also for aviation, not only in Europe, but across the world. With the Green Deal and really the ambition of Europe to be the best pupil of the class and to work towards net zero or carbon neutrality by 2050, to be sort of in line with the Paris Agreement. Automatically, European industry is therefore also needs to commit to very stringent measures in order to achieve that target. Now, within transport, as far as I know, aviation, European aviation will be the only one so far that is really committing to net zero by 2050. According to the Green Deal, transport will be responsible to reduce 70% of its emissions. With our goal to net zero by 2050, we are a major contributor now to help to reach that goal. Although emissions for aviation, if I can remind you, in Europe is only responsible for 3 to 4%, we have been under a lot of pressure, and also I would say not so much only from the regulators, but also by investors and the passengers to further reduce CO2 emissions. So we're doing that now. We are committing to it. The work on the study of Destination 2050 started about a year and a half ago. It was an idea of A4E, but we quickly realized that we had to partner with the other aviation players, that is the air navigation service providers, the airports, the regional airlines, and the manufacturers. And all of those other four sectors have quickly joined the initiative. And hence, today we have the 5 partners, the 5 groups, the initiators of this initiative. So obviously, it's the entire European aviation sector which is now behind it, which makes it very, very strong as an initiative. The study itself is written by, not by us, but obviously by an independent consortium, a research consortium. On the one hand, consisting of the Royal Netherlands Aerospace Centre, NLR, and the SEO Amsterdam Economics Group. So both economics and aviation and aerospace specialists and environmentalists have written the study. And what Destination 2050 shows is that this is a pathway. This is a roadmap to go to 2030 and how to go to 2050 with the ultimate goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And where it really talks about 4 different pillars, how to achieve the CO2 reductions towards 2050. And it combines 4 pillars. The most important pillar is investments needed in green new aircraft with new engine technologies. The second most important pillar for the reduction is the use of sustainable aviation fuels by aviation. The third one is smart economic measures. Last but not least, what we mentioned already in the other question is a more efficient air traffic management, so single European sky. And all that, working through those 4 pillars, through a roadmap, that all is possible with an annual growth of 1.4%. So the nice thing about this roadmap is that we actually are able to prove that we can grow in a sustainable manner. So, for instance, the claim that yes, you need to reduce emissions and you cannot further grow is not correct. We have shown with this study, this independent research, that we can grow at 1.4% and at the same time by 2050, which is really groundbreaking. Now, the report was launched last month in February through the media and then towards the policymakers in Brussels and beyond. And it has been very warmly welcomed by regulators and policymakers and governments, as it clearly shows the commitment of a sector which has been in the past criticized of being, I would say, so said, not perceived to be active enough in reducing CO2 emissions. We have always thought differently, but this study shows our real commitment. And of course, it will take a lot of work, investments, a lot of efforts from both sides, from the industry side, but also from the government side, because it's quite obvious that the government, through policy funding initiatives of, for instance, replacing old fleet, but also having the right regulatory framework, for instance, in sustainable aviation fuels, to have the regulatory framework that allows us to invest, because it makes no sense for us to continue to invest in certain parts of this roadmap. Well, on the other hand, we would be blocked by the EU or governments in certain instances, so that we cannot make our ambition, ambition to become a reality. I could go a little bit more into detail on the pillars, but it's basically important to retain is that investments in new technologies, investments in sustainable aviation fuels and the use of that, and then smart economic measures and improvements in ATM are basically the 4 most important pillars here.
Absolutely. I already had a couple of guests talking about sustainable aviation fuel and its wider implementation on this podcast. And actually, it's, as you mentioned about the single European sky, it's very similar also with sustainable aviation fuel. Is the really low-hanging fruit, because you don't really need new technology. You don't really need new engines or the airport technology to to start with a sustainable aviation fuel. You just need to bring the cost of production down, and of course to scale it. So do you agree with that, that this is something that we can again implement very quickly?
Well, the sustainable aviation fuels, it does have a challenge, and the challenge is that we do not have sufficient sustainable aviation fuels available. So I'm talking about sustainable aviation fuels, and the definition of sustainable here is very important. What you have for now is a competition for these sustainable fuels, biofuels in some sector, but sustainable fuels in all of the transport sectors. And the EU, but also national governments, but the European Commission to start with, needs to prioritize the use of these sustainable aviation fuels for aviation, for the simple reason, and the unfortunate reason in a way, depends how you look at that, is that for the next decade or so, at least the next decade, aviation will be bound to continue to use today's fossil fuel propulsion technology. So it basically, we have no alternative for most of the flights to continue to use the engines we use today. You may upgrade the engines, they may become more fuel efficient, and they will become more fuel efficient. But at the end of the day, the basis will still be a fossil fuel-based propulsion, which you can blend and so on. But it will take some time before we then move to more electrification, to hybrid systems for a certain type of aircraft. Not all aircraft will be able to be electrified in terms of propulsion in the short term. But then by the time that you see that hydrogen propulsion will be introduced on the market for aviation, that will take until 2030, 2035. And this is all that's part of the roadmap, that's how it's described. But that also, of course, takes into account that we are able to have the proper funding, to have the support of the governments, that we are able to invest in these technologies. So if all the conditions are met and in the right place, even then, technologies such as hydrogen propulsion will only be put in the market operationally by 2035. And this is, you're absolutely right, this is why we put so much focus on the importance of the development, the production, the availability, and the affordability of sustainable aviation fuels for aviation, simply because short term we will have very little alternatives.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you on that. For cars, there already is alternative. We have fully electric cars, as you are saying. For the planes, it will take some time to have definitely on the short haul that opportunity. Right. 2050 net goal, net zero. So what do you think? That there might be like two angles on that. One can be that it's really ambitious. The question is if it's how realistic is it to really reach net zero in 2050. On the other hand, there might be people saying that we don't have so much time. I mean, the climate, the planet, we need to act faster, quicker. Where do you stand on those two angles?
Well, Destination 2050 is, of course, a roadmap. There are several ways, there are several roadmaps. We think it's a very ambitious roadmap, but at the same time realistic. If we can, if we can have all the conditions that we put in place, if we can actually have follow-up actions on that and real commitments from industry and governments. So it is ambitious. We have no choice. Aviation has always been quite ambitious in order to lower cost, to lower fuel burn, and therefore emissions. This is, I would say, a strengthened effort from aviation. As aviation, we cannot afford to sit still or use this crisis as an excuse not to invest, to continue to invest in green aviation. We are too important, I think, for the European economy. We provide the connectivity. I'm not only talking passengers, but obviously also the cargo aspect is very important. We support, as aviation, a sector about 10 million jobs across the EU alone. And for this reason, because of the huge societal role also that aviation is playing, we really have to make Destination 2050, to give it one name, but we really need to make net zero by 2050 a reality. There is really no way back. And I think any airline CEO in Europe you will talk to will actually agree with that. There is a consensus on this now for a while. Destination 2050, I think, shows the result of this consensus from a scientific perspective. I think the very important condition for us is now, I think the ball is now in the camp of the regulators and of the politicians. And so, for instance, when in Brussels there are discussions going on in the Council about single European sky, you will see that, for instance, many member states agree on the principle that is actually a great thing to achieve. But when you go to the detail and when you start discussing details, then all of a sudden these old wrong assumptions, these antique assumptions, as if Europe was taking away the power of the national state, all these things come back, I think, for the wrong reasons. So this is just one example where we very much support the European Commission in its effort for a single European sky. And from a sustainability perspective, at the council level, people should really not blow hot and cold. There really is a huge opportunity potential to cut down CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions, everyone wants to reduce. We want to do our part. Now, really, it's up to the governments to also recognize that and to support us and actually also walk the talk, as I would say.
Absolutely. Last question about sustainability before we move to our final topic. What can we do? What everyone can do to support this initiative? I mean, our community is mainly airports, regional airports in Europe, tourism boards, airlines, of course, suppliers, different kind of aviation suppliers. What can we do as community to support you, to support this initiative?
Well, the great thing about Destination 2050 is that already European aviation as a whole, the airlines, the airports, the manufacturers and the air navigation service providers, we're all on the same page. And this is so great why we have actually partnered and initiated this initiative with the leading European associations. So that's a given. And so there shouldn't really be anyone hopefully around that would disagree with that. So assuming there is, of course, knowing that there is full support from the industry side for this, this makes it extremely powerful. For instance, from the manufacturing side, where we know probably most of the work will need to be done because technology will play a pivotal role in reducing CO2 emissions, that's quite clear. Also from a sustainable aviation supplier side. So I think everyone is now very well aware of his and her task in this. And what we need to do now is, I think, and what we are doing is explain to the public, not only to our passengers, but to the wider public, all the people who like to travel again, people who are concerned about air travel in the widest sense of the world, is to let them spread, I would say, the hope, the good news that there is a plan and the support, the public support, therefore also the political support at all levels in European society for this plan. So again, it's very important to realize that everyone knows from the top to the bottom, from left to right, that European aviation as an industry is committed. So let's work together. We can all do our bits. We have now said basically what we can do from a scientific, commercial and business development perspective, an industry perspective. Now I think we need the support of society overall to work with us. And I do think that passengers really miss, first of all, flying and air travel. And I do think that they realize the importance of sustainability, in particular in this case, reduction of CO2 emissions. So I'm quite hopeful that we will see further support from the larger audience in this.
Absolutely, and we are here to support. That's why we are doing this podcast, actually. So we will do our bit as well. And we actually already we did a video with the hashtag Aviation Matters a couple of days ago, which is already gaining momentum and hundreds of views on YouTube, where we try to remind the wide population about how important aviation is for the economy, for the humankind, especially now in the times of pandemic. So absolutely, there is definitely point there. Let's come back from the quite a distant future to what we are facing right now. Massive challenges. Still, the pandemic is with us. Obviously, we see a massive lights flashing on us from the end of the tunnel, with vaccination gaining momentum, definitely here in Europe. So, what are your views? How do you see the industry recovery here in Europe for the upcoming months? Let's say, how do you see the summer 2021?
Yeah, very good. The obvious question, the most important thing is for us to be able to restart. And last year, I think it's commonly known in the sector, was the worst year for European aviation ever. I mean, for Europe, for aviation worldwide, but certainly for European aviation, Europe was the worst performer. If you look just at the traffic of airlines, was the worst performer compared to other parts of the world. Unfortunately, we're not doing that much better if you look at traffic compared to Q4 last year. According to the latest Eurocontrol figures, traffic is still down 65% versus 2019. Of course, we always compare with the normal year 2019, not with 2020 now. With 2020, we're roughly at the same level. It's interesting to note that at the beginning of the year, Eurocontrol was still slightly optimistic and was forecasting that through 21, so this year, to for the traffic to recover to 50% capacity versus 2019 levels. Now, what we've seen so far in Q1 is not really very hopeful, and that is mainly due to the I would say not only the travel restrictions because of the pandemic, but worse so because of the uncoordinated way member states are introducing travel restrictions, in spite of the clear plea, several pleas of the European Commission, approach to the recommendations that European Commission has given several times, including recommendations from EASA. But so that aside, that seems to be, continues to be the main bottleneck to go to, I would say, even to start even thinking about a recovery. We'll need to start flying again, and as long as we have these uncoordinated travel restrictions, that will remain a big problem. In terms of the biggest season, I mean, the most important season for us is, of course, the summer season. As you may recall, last summer started off relatively well because the mood was optimistic, and we were in between two waves. But then I think once mid-August, I would say the pandemic and the emotions on the pandemic and the mood changed again. So the summer of last year was not a success. And if things continue the way they are now, in terms of travel restrictions, but also the lack of, I would say, an ambitious enough vaccination programs or rollout of vaccination across Europe, we're certainly not there yet. As long as that's not really in place, I think we're trying to, in Europe, we expect to vaccinate about 70% of the population, which you would need for immunity of this virus. We're still very far from that. And as long as that's not the case, I fear that 21 will be a very, very difficult year. When we will recover, there are different analyses about it, but basically it's 24 to 25, depending who you listen to. But those forecasts going back to normal, but 24 and 25 or recover, those are based on the current situation, assuming that the current situation does not get worse. So again, we need to get priority. We need to get to the immunity as quickly as possible, so that the national governments, hopefully in a harmonized way, but that the national governments can release the travel restrictions as quickly as possible. And that goes both for essential and non-essential travel, really, because we need both types of travel, and whether it's leisure travel or business travel, I think we need to make sure that everyone can travel in a safe manner, which we have proven, of course, several times, by the way, travel in a safe manner as quickly as possible.
Definitely. Thomas, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, your precious time. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, your insights with us, and fingers crossed for all your initiatives, definitely with Destination 2050 and supporting your members. Last thing before we say goodbye, this question which I always ask at the very end: what do you love the most about aviation?
Oh, it's the freedom to move, the travel and the connectivity across the world. That's just wonderful, bringing people together.
Amen to that. Take care, Thomas. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Juraj. Bye-bye. Have a good one.